Welcome to this Academy for Teachers Masterclass, Acting, the Art of Empathy with Brian McEleney. I hope I said that right. Yeah, awesome. I'm Cheryl Hale, and I've been teaching at Dream Charter School in East Harlem for the past 10 years, but this is my 20th year teaching. And I love what I do. I love what I do because I know firsthand how the arts can completely change your life. And I'm so proud to have the opportunity to do that with my students. I'm a proud member, a proud fellow of the Academy for Teachers, an organization that treats teaching as the noble profession that it really is. The high caliber of master classes are led by brilliant experts that validate, stimulate, and challenge our current teaching practices, as well as our own professional and our personal growth. My last master class with the Teacher Academy fueled me for like months on end afterwards. And it was also the beginning of some brand new friendships that I still have today and are growing stronger. It was a really amazing time. I have the honor of introducing Brian McEleney. Brian is head of the Brown University Trinity Repertory M.F.A. acting program, a longtime member of the resident acting company at Providence's Trinity Repertory Company, and head of the theater program at the Loaf School of English. When I read the description to Professor McEleney's masterclass, I was immediately hooked, and I knew that I had to take this class, and I knew my students needed me to take this class. But Brian is not the only star of this masterclass. It is also my honor to introduce the 12 teachers here today who were selected from many, many applicants. A teacher, an Academy Fellow teacher, is an exceptional teacher, passionate about their subject matter, creative in their classroom, and devoted to their students. This is an impressive group here. We have advanced degrees in dance and education and special education, international relations, and theater. And we teach grades K through 12 in public schools, in charter schools, in independent schools. We teach some really interesting subjects like sports journalism. That was new for me. Drama, choir, art, puppetry, algebra and geometry. And the amount of extracurricular activities that we lead and advise are phenomenal. And they're from theater tech all the way to varsity girls soccer. We've been in the classroom, this is really cool. We've been in the classroom between all of us, 4 to 37 years. The total number of years we've been teaching is 172. And we teach between 30 and 538 kids. The number of children who know our names is 2,338. And that's just this year. So your real audience today, Brian, is not just us, but it's our 2,338 kids. Because every teacher here will in some way share with them what we learned from you. The ripple effect of masterclass is huge. So thank you, Professor McEleney, for being here. Thanks to all my fellow teachers for being here and teaching. And with that, let the masterclass begin. Brian, take it away.
All right.
Thank you, Cheryl. That's awesome.
That was beautiful. I cry a lot in my work. I'm already crying. Here I am. That was an amazing introduction to all of you, and I hope you'll all get to know each other a lot better over the next few weeks. So let me tell you a bit about who I am and what I want to do and why we're here. I don't know, and that may all change as time goes on. As Cheryl told you, I've been an actor all my life. For about 45 years I've been acting, and I've also been teaching. For most of my teaching career, I teach at the graduate level. I teach young professionals who have already graduated from college and want to go into the profession. So I'm teaching a very specific group of students who already know who they are and what they want to do and where they are going. My primary area of expertise is not using theater in the classroom or anything like that, though I'm happy to discuss those issues, but you are the experts in that, and I would be delighted to help you think through those issues. But my main area of expertise is acting and acting teaching. Students are always asking me, What method do you teach? And I always laugh and I say, I teach McEleney, because that's ultimately what you teach. Acting is a subject that you can't learn from books. It has always been passed down from person to person, to practitioner, and that's how it works. Though when I'm pressed, and I'm always pressed, I always say that basically I'm a Stanislavskian. I don't know how much all of you know. I could go on for 2 hours about acting methods and acting teaching methods now, and I don't necessarily want to do that. But when I say I'm a Stanislavskian, what I mean is that I am teaching from a long tradition of acting. Stanislavski was a Russian actor, theater director, teacher in the late 19th century, who actually we think of as the father of modern acting teaching. He didn't invent anything. What Stanislavski did was that he looked around at actors that he admired and tried to figure out what they were doing and tried to systematize that and write down how they got there. And the actors that he were watching, there was no real acting training before Stanislavski. Actors have been doing this in the West, at least, in Europe, for centuries upon centuries. You can read Hamlet's advice to the players, in which he says, I have it written down somewhere. He says, suit the action to the word to the action, with this special observance that you o'erstep not the modesty of nature, for anything so overdone is from the purpose of playing, whose end, both at the first and now, was and is to hold as 'twere the mirror up to nature, to show virtue her feature, scorn her own image, and the very age and body of the time, his form and pressure. That was 400 years ago, and it's still what actors are doing, and we've always been doing it. As I said, this is a European tradition. There are lots of Eastern traditions, China, Japan, India, Cambodia, and others that have many centuries of very, very systematized acting training. There are African traditions that are rooted in the oral tradition, in dance and music. There are Native American traditions that are rooted in their own storytelling traditions. What I teach and what I'm capable of teaching is the European tradition. There are lots of other teachers who teach, who are able to access other traditions in ways that I cannot. But the Stanislavskian tradition of realism is pervasive in what we know in America, because it was the tradition that ultimately was used for film and film and television, which is where we see most of our acting now. A lot of people aren't lucky enough to see live theater. None of us has for the last year. But what we see basically in movies and television is realism in the Stanislavski tradition. So that's what I am teaching. I'm not a strict Stanislavskian. And in fact, I'll just do a tiny bit of theater history. As I said, there was no theater training before Stanislavski. Actors basically acted, and they apprenticed to acting theater companies or learned how to act and just kind of played small parts and then played larger parts and larger parts. And if they were especially sexy or good looking or were good at something that people wanted to see, that's how they became what they did. There was a movement. One of the reasons Stanislavski is so important is that his work coincided with what we know of in dramatic literature as the invention of realism, with Chekhov and Strindberg and Ibsen. And they were trying to make a case for theater as an actual art form, which had never really existed before. It was kind of like we think of, or we have award shows, but we kind of think of movies and TV as not a real art form, as, kind of entertainment. And that's what theater was for centuries. And then all of a sudden people said, this could be an art form that we could study and appreciate and talk about. And so those things were happening at the same time. And Stanislavski formed his Moscow Art Theater with Chekhov's plays. Tell me if I'm going too fast. We can come back and hit on this. I don't know if it's of general interest or not. And And the Moscow Art Theater really revolutionized acting training and said, this is something that we can study and systematize and talk about and promulgate and put into our work. The Moscow Art, there was no acting training in America. There was basically no theater as art in America. The Moscow Art Theater, sorry, that's my phone. I don't know how to turn it off. The Moscow Art Theater came to America and toured in the late 20s, early 30s, and caused a sensation with the kind of overwhelming realism that they were bringing to the theater, in the sense that these were real people, not actors declaiming or emoting or doing those things that we think of in old-fashioned acting, but they were actually doing what we think of now as acting, of entering into a human's experience and trying to convey that through action to an audience. That revolutionized acting in America. And a lot of acting schools sprang up in response to the Moscow Art Theater. Two of their actors, Boris Boleslavsky and Maria Ouspenskaya, stayed in America and started their own school. And from that school came the group theater, and then the actor's studio, method acting, everything we think of in that kind of mid-century American acting of Marlon Brando and James Dean and those people who were very, very emotional. It was I can talk about that too. It's a very, very specific kernel of the Stanislavski system that they were teaching that became the pervasive form of American acting, extremely realistic, extremely based in personal, emotional memory, in idiosyncratic, bring your own idiosyncratic personal life to the stage. And this was what American acting was for a good chunk of the mid-20th century. Then, in the 60s, the National Endowment for the Arts was born, and all these theaters started springing up over America. Well, before this time, theater was basically, not entirely, but basically in New York. And that's where you went to see theater. You went to Broadway and went to see theater in New York. With the National Endowment for the Arts, all these theaters started springing up all over the country that were supported by the government. This was a far distant time when the government was interested in supporting the arts. But with the birth of these theaters in the 60s, all of a sudden came the need for actors who could perform in a wide range of acting styles, in Shakespeare, in the Greeks, in Restoration, in various kinds of European theater, doing Chekhov and Ibsen, and not just American realism. And so as a response to that need, all the M.F.A. programs that I am extremely familiar with, and that most actors go through at some point who have careers, all those M.F.A. programs sprang up. Like the Yale School of Drama where I went, and Juilliard, and NYU, and all these schools. And that's the tradition of teaching that I come out of, how to use what we know of the Stanislavski system, and yet to open it up to a wide range of how do you actually use those elements of personalization and psychology and empathy and all those things that we think of as good acting, and yet also be able to have the technical expertise to do Shakespeare and the Greeks and all those other plays. So that's what I spend my life doing. Any questions? Sam and I went around, we had I proposed a couple of titles for this workshop. And the first was, what was it? The Fear of Overacting. When I watched Joe Biden get inaugurated, I said, I've been too inspired. I have to retitle this, Acting the Art of Empathy. Because that really, to me, is what acting is. As I said, I teach at a high professional level, but I absolutely believe that acting is something that everybody should study, that acting is a basic human activity. It it is just like sports and music and art and writing and poetry. It is something that all human beings should engage in. Not everybody should do it professionally, just like not everybody should be a professional sports star or a professional musician or a professional singer. But this is something that is fundamental, I think, to the human experience and is an avenue for opening the imagination beyond yourself, which is what the arts are about, of expressing yourself, which is what the arts are about. And most, I think, uniquely in the arts, it's really an art of empathy, because what acting is at its base is actually stepping into another person's shoes and saying, what would it be like to be him? What would it be like to be her? What are they going through right now? How can I understand that? How can I make that experience my own? How can I understand what they're living through so that I can actually live through it too for an audience? It's a big and important leap of imagination that I think you are all in the trenches teaching young people how to actually enliven their imaginations to do this. And I think there's nothing more important. You know, a lot of students when they come to me, and I'm sure a lot of students when they come to you, think that acting is about being natural. How can I just be natural? How can I just be casual? This is not what acting is. And I hope you saw that in all the monologues that I made you sit through. I don't care if you sat through them or if you watched all of them, but I hope they were inspirational to you. That sometimes and occasionally acting is just about being real and being casual and being natural. Nobody needs to teach you how to do that. We all know how to do that. Acting, to me, is about doing something that's profoundly, profoundly unnatural, which is standing up in front of a group of people and actually putting yourself out there. And as humans, most of us, every fiber in our body fights against that and tells us not to do that. And that's what's really natural. The natural thing is to avoid. The natural thing is to shut down. The natural thing is to just kind of hang back. And what actors do, which fills me with pride and admiration, is they actually run into danger. They say, I am going to take a dangerous situation and enter into it. And you actually do need training, or if not training, at least practice to do that, because our bodies resist it. Just the way athletes have to train themselves to do an unnatural thing. They have to train themselves to, after the first couple of minutes, when the burn starts and your body starts shutting down, athletes have to train themselves, steel themselves to stay in there and keep at it, keep going, to do something that's really not natural. And that all of us resist, and that one of the arts of acting is to actually face that thing that says, no, I won't get involved. And what most plays are about is playwrights saying, how can I write about people who are actually in the midst of grappling with problems, issues, experiences that most of us would run as fast as we could away from, rather than actually engage from. Plays tend to be about the moment when you decide to tell your parents X, when you decide that this relationship isn't working, the time where you finally say, I'm fed up, I can't take it anymore, I have to actually deal with this. These are really hard moments in life that most of us avoid and spend years avoiding. And in a play, that's what those 2 hours tend to be about. And it's a privilege. It's one of the great joys of acting. Say, okay, I'm going to get in there and we're going to do this. We're actually going to deal with whatever the issue of the play is about. And this is why I think it's a noble profession, because we help people actually see, deal with, demonstrate for them what it would be like if we all had courage, if we all had the courage to actually be in there and do it. In my experience, am I talking too much? Sam, am I talking too much? Yes? No?
No, you're good.
You're perfect, Brian.
I'm perfect.
Perfect.
See, acting is an act of courage, and the opposite of courage is fear. And I have consistently found in my own acting life and in my teaching life that the primary obstacle to good acting is fear. And this happens at the professional level. It is something that I deal with every day. It is something that every actor deals with every day. And it's something that, God knows, teenagers deal with in capital letters, underlined in italics every day. So actually dealing with fear is one of the primary things that you're dealing with when you're an actor. And fear manifests itself in thousands of ways. Our fear that we're not good enough, or we're not smart enough, or we're not pretty enough, or we're not masculine enough, or we're not this enough, and it's really easy to give in to fear. And one of the reasons we take acting classes is to learn to fight against that fear, that I don't have the authority to do this, or that I don't have the intelligence to do this, or the emotions to do this, or the imagination to do this, or any of those other things. And fear at my level of teaching, fear manifests in all kinds of in technical ways too, because fear builds up over years and years and years. And a lot of what professional acting training is learning how fear manifests itself on a technical level, how we learn in life to kind of speak with our voices like this and swallow it down, because it's much easier to kind of do this. I don't even know if you can hear me now, but this is what we do. And this is the normal, natural way of speaking. And it's extraordinarily unexpressive. And how do you get beyond that fear and say, not only I'm going to actually be expressive when I speak, but I'm going to work on what are the 20, 30 years of musculature, of tension that I've built up that are getting in the way of me doing that? What are the 20, 30 years of me in my body trying to hide from the world, of, carrying tension in my shoulders, or trying to hide my pelvis or my chest or whatever other parts of, the world, especially in your teenage kids, they learn how to protect themselves. And it's a really freeing thing to learn how to put that fear aside and say, I'm going to be present. I'm just going to be here and not hide and not swallow my stuff, and be present physically and imaginatively, vocally, intellectually, emotionally, all those things. And it's a long thing. Acting training in the M.F.A. level usually takes 3 years. So it's not something that happens overnight, but it's, as I say, if you're going to be a professional musician, you have to study for years as well. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't study music when we're young. Same thing with professional athletes. They train every day for hours and hours and hours, dancers. This is at the professional level, but it's the same things hold true for whatever level you're teaching in. I want to bring this back to the homework. In my experience, one of the greatest fears is the fear of overacting. And this is the one that I find the most important to confront early on. And it's the one that I have found most helpful in getting rid of that fear, gets rid of many of the other fears. We're so afraid of overacting because, you know, the primary venue for acting that we see is films, where actors, I don't know if any of you have ever worked on a film, but they have microphones everywhere. There are microphones in their shirts and microphones in their wigs and microphones here, and there's boom. And I swear to you, the actors in films do this. This is what they do. This is what they're doing when they act. And the microphone picks it up and it magnifies it. And that's, which is fine for film. And it's very important for film. And film is an art form that I respect. However, the camera is doing a lot of the acting work, and the microphone is doing a lot of the acting work. And so when we see people who aren't trained really acting on film, we say, oh my God, that's too much. And we just get very afraid of overacting. And our acting teachers are, you know, tell us that, oh my God, you can't, that overacting is the worst sin. In my world, overacting is not the worst sin. The worst sin is underacting. It's a much worse sin, and it's much more pervasive, and it's not half as much fun to watch. So one of the things that I want to deal with in our time together is the fear of overacting, and how can we think about that? Just want to say one more thing on this subject. One of my favorite quotes of acting teachers ever, Stella Adler, was one of the great acting teachers of the 20th century. And she and I have a lot in common. I like to think. I learned a lot from her. She influenced me a lot. But there's a very famous class where she was teaching and she was saying some of the same things that I've just been saying to you. And a student raised his hand and he said, "What, you want us to be larger than life?" And Stella stared at him and said, "What could be larger than life?" It's our job to give life. It's our job to make life be present, not our job to hide it under a bushel. So I just want to put that out there as one of the places that I'm coming from as a teacher. How do we actually be expressive and not be afraid to say what's in our hearts? You know, it's not for nothing that if you watched all four of these montages that I sent you, that by far the most popular actor that they chose was Al Pacino. And nobody's ever accused Al Pacino of underacting. He just brings it. And when you have a monologue that you want to land, you hire Al Pacino because he's not going to hold back and just make it natural. You know, Viola Davis was practically jumping out of the screen in that scene from Fences. These are people who get what acting is, from my point of view. I should stop talking for just a second. I have much more to talk about and how we're going to move on. But any thoughts, questions, responses? I'm willing to argue with anybody. Disagreements?
This is where you have to overcome fear.
Say it again.
This is where they have to overcome fear.
Yeah.
I was going to say, actually, that's the word I have a lot, I was writing, and that's the word that's on my mind a lot. Right now, it's the word fear, and how you said the actors run into the danger. There's fear. Let's go into it. So I'm just intrigued of seeing the role of an actor as, like a danger ambassador, kind of. Let's tackle this.
It's interesting because I teach at an all-boys school, and our motto is courage, honor, truth. And the boys, they really relate to the words, but it's interesting to see, like in real life, in theater, okay, put your money where your mouth is. When you talk about courage, I'm asking you to stand up in front of your friends and genuinely feel genuinely put yourself in this character's shoes, because they're really, really comfortable being like class clowns and stuff like that, and being like funny and whatever that attention they could get. But putting and coming back to in our small group, the word vulnerability, like, can you actually let yourself be vulnerable in front of your friends with the fear of judgment and the like so many fears, and especially in the middle school. So middle school boys, it's intense, and I'm fully aware that is what I'm asking them to do.
You are amazing, and our time is somewhat limited. Time goes by so fast that I would like to go on and just from these two things, because the question is, how do you overcome fear? And that's what we're teaching. That's certainly what I'm teaching. That's what one of the answers that you all want to hear. How do you actually confront fear? Because it's the easiest thing to say. You have to be courageous and you have to confront fear. Does us no good at all. That just makes you more fearful. It's just like telling you have to be excellent. Well,
maybe by, like, if you're actually present and like with the character, then maybe you sort of forget that there's anybody watching. I don't know. I mean, theoretically, right? Isn't that kind of what we're going for? So if you're immersed and really experiencing this scene or this situation with this person, then maybe it makes, I don't know, you forget or something.
yeah. Yes. In my experience, you never forget there's an audience there. Always there. And this is kind of a, pervasive misunderstanding that actors kind of think that they're really the person. Nobody ever thinks that's mental illness. That's not what acting is. However, I do want to go on, and I'm going to talk for a second, because the answer to fear is empathy. The answer to fear is not courage. The answer to fear is empathy. To know that as much as you need to bring yourself, as much as you need to bring your imagination, your voice, your experience, your understanding, all those things, that it's ultimately not about you. And that's an incredibly freeing thing. It's just not about you. It is about, and you got to find ways to, and we all do, and I still do, because the fear is pervasive. How do you make it not be about you? How can you make it be about giving voice to somebody else's experience, to saying, I get to actually imagine what it would be like to be a kid who's going through this, or I get to imagine what it's like to be a mother going, and I get to give her a voice. I have the opportunity to actually speak this playwright's words and make them come alive in human form, so that you're thinking of acting as an opportunity to actually do service, to actually make something that is outside of yourself come alive, so that you're using your tools, your gifts, your instrument, your imagination to help somebody else, to help the character who you're trying to embody, to help the playwright who you're trying to get their story across, to help the audience. And this is why it's important not to forget the audience, to say, they're actually seeing this story. I get to tell them this story, and I have a responsibility to them to make them hear it, to really make them hear it and understand it and see what these characters are going through. And that's how the act of imagination really allows you to step outside of fear, but you have to do it. And that empathy is an act of courage as well, to say, all right, I'm actually going to think about who this person is and what he's going through and what are the circumstances he's in now. And how can I express what's in his heart knowing from my own experience what it is to express what's in my heart. And that's how you do both things. You're always kind of using yourself, your understanding of what it is or what it might be to be in a situation like this, but then saying, this isn't me, I'm not in that situation, this person is, and I have to take responsibility for actually doing justice to his life. And that's, I find that very freeing. I like to talk to my students about opportunity. This is an opportunity to do something wonderful for someone else, for an audience, for this character who you're playing, for this playwright who spent so long working on this play, trying to grapple with these questions, these issues. Empathy, to me, is the key of deciding to do that. Wow. Oy, 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 oy. And I hope I can all inspire you to do that in your work with me in the next couple of weeks and with your students. Wow. What I don't want this to be a lecture, but sometimes you need to talk for a while before you actually start. In the course description, I said that what I really want to do is work on monologues with you all. And I'll spill my guts to you right in front of Sam. So I thought that would be your homework, to choose a monologue to work on, because in my world, actors know how to do that. They know what to do. They pick a monologue and they work on it and they rehearse it, and then we work on it and make it better. I got the feeling from Sam that might be working too fast, and that I would need to give you a lot more direction on how to choose monologues and what to do and how to begin and how to do that. And so I want to meet you where you are. I absolutely want to meet you where you are. We can talk about choosing monologues, knowing that in the time of COVID, some of you are stuck in your houses. Some of you don't have access to libraries. And I spent half my life hanging around in the stacks of libraries looking for plays and reading plays. And that's what I do. Now there's no libraries. I can't go into the Providence Public Library. So I don't know what your access to plays is. So, I said, you can pick anything that you want in your home library. You can pick part of a novel. You can pick something from the newspaper. You can pick anything. And I'm willing to work on anything and eager to work on anything. But as I was reading your biographies that Sam and Rachel sent, you all seem to know what theater and acting is. Have any of you chosen monologues?
Like right now or in the past?
No, to work on in this workshop. Oh. Nicole, I saw fear raises its hand.
I don't know so much so it's an old monologue that I used, but I'm in a different place in my life. Like I'm a mom now. So I thought that might be cool to explore, sort of, if there's something, I don't know. I was doing the monologue when I didn't have kids and I was like in my 20s. It's really funny, kind of. So yeah.
I'm happy to look at it. Do other people have things that we want to look at today?
Oh, I wasn't ready for today. But I do, yeah.
If you were my graduate acting class, I'd send you all home to get to work. But okay, this is good. This is where we are. So let's talk about choosing things, and also, what do you do when you pick up a monologue? What do actors actually do? I asked you the question when you were looking at those video montages. What is it to pick up a piece of paper with writing on it and turn it into human experience? Where do you begin and what do you do? You all have ideas about this. I know, because a lot of you teach theater. So let's throw out some ideas. So how do you begin working on a monologue? How would you ask your students to begin working on a monologue? Let's make it not about us.
Well,
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Daniel.
When I was in college, I actually studied for 3 years at the Atlantic in the city, and they trained us in practical aesthetics, which was looking at any pieces of text and asking 4 simple questions. What's literally happening? What does your character want? How do you describe that or translate it into an action? And then an as if, what is that like for you? Like, give an imaginary circumstance that you can connect to. So I find what is really helpful is to answer that first question. What's literally happening? Like, just what's going on the page? And for me, a lot of times that means like just rereading what's on the page, just to find out what's actually going on before I start asking character questions and talking about point of view and interpreting it from perspective. It really helps to get as clear a picture as possible to what's literally happening, and then start from there. But I think that like nothing else goes on until you really get the answer to that question first.
Completely. Yes. What Daniel is describing is a complicated thing. And to use a fancy term, it's what we call dramaturgy. Actually looking at the play and saying, what is here? What is this play? Before you start asking, so many young actors immediately start saying, what am I feeling? And what should my costume be? Or what do I, crazy questions that you can't possibly answer yet. You want to start with, what is going on here? We can deal with this with as much depth and specificity as we have time for, but in the best of all possible worlds, you want to deal with the whole play. You want to ask yourself, just as you're being empathetic to the character, you want to be empathetic to the playwright. What is the playwright writing about? What is the issue, the problem, the thing that prompted this playwright to write this play? What is the world that all of these characters are living in, that this playwright created because she wanted to write a play about X? I could choose any player. I'll choose, I think a playwright most of you would know would be Tennessee Williams. Every Tennessee Williams play ever written is written about more or less the same thing. How can you, in one person, be a moral person, a spiritual person, an artistic person, and yet also be a carnal person, also be an animal? How do we deal with that profound internal struggle between our animal natures and our spiritual natures? And all his plays are about that. And once you make that definition, then you say, oh, I see what's going on in this play. How can I understand that thing that this play is about? And how can I use it to inform my acting? I'm talking about big dramaturgical issues, which is, I'm going a little farther afield than Daniel was. But then, so you want to look at the whole play and say, what does this playwright want from us? Why are we doing this play? What do we want the audience to get from this play? And how can I, in my storytelling, in my acting, help to convey that? or think about that, or think about my character in terms of that, or the story as a playing out of those struggles. And the best plays are usually about internal conflicts, societal conflicts, cultural conflicts, personal conflicts that are ultimately irreconcilable. And that's why the play exists, because they're not solvable. If they're solvable, it's usually a bad TV movie. But great art is about things that, we're all struggling with all the time and are almost unreconcilable. Then, as Daniel says, you want to start breaking the play down into smaller things, looking at the scene you're in, so that if you have a monologue, it's part of a larger scene. What is that scene about? And the more specificity you have, the easier it is to step into somebody's shoes. You notice that neither Daniel or I keep using your name because you did have some acting training at the Atlantic, which is a wonderful school. Nobody's asking how you feel. This is not the question you want to be asking. The question you want to be asking is, what is the experience that I'm being asked to examine or live in or look at? Before you ask yourself how you feel. You should probably never ask yourself how you feel, but in those monologues, some of the specifics were, what is the event in which this person is talking? Some of them were political speeches. Some of them were talking to people, talking to friends. Some of them were very intimate family scenes. Some of them were teachers talking to students. Some of them, there were all kinds of things. What is that event? And how do I understand how to behave in that event? When you're giving a political speech, it's very different than if you're standing up in a town meeting and just talking without being prepared. How do you understand the circumstances in which you're speaking? Where are you? To whom are you speaking? How do you speak to those people? The way you speak to your mother is different than the way you speak to your students. Is different than the way you speak to your husband. Is different than the way you speak to strangers or a large group or a small group. And using all that knowledge to help you understand what is the experience that I'm actually having? What is going on here? So you're not just trying to have feelings, which is not a human activity. You always want to be trying to do what is something that humans actually do rather than what do actors do. What is literally happening here? And how can I understand that as a human event that I get? And you say, and that's where you start using your own stuff. You say, oh, I know what it's like to speak in front of a class. I know what it's like the one time I, blew up with my husband, my mother, my children. I know what that means. I know what the consequences of that are. I know what's at stake to do that. And you start saying, oh, I get what that is. And so you're doing what the person is doing, but you're also saying, what do I get about that? How do I understand this? I hope I've inspired you. I hope I haven't frightened you. Acting is supposed to be fun. They call it plays because it's supposed to be play. So I hope that we can have fun over the next couple of weeks.